Welcome again to the fall council meetings. It does grieve me that we are not in person, but I'm so glad we can be here together on Zoom, and each of you with your councils. Thank you everyone for the comments on my shirt. Also my glasses. Charlie Riggio gave me these glasses. I love these glasses. And today's second keynote, Heartwood, the art of living with the end in mind. I'm so deeply moved by this beautiful book and Barbara Becker. And I'm going to introduce Barbara in a moment, but before I do, let me just give you a quick update on the community, on our community. As most of you know, we have been extending the member experience. So you need not ever walk alone through the journey of your life. And our vision is simple. What I want to create, what I think we are creating, is what I'm calling a longitudinal community. A longitudinal community where we are there for each other each step of the way. And I want us to help you, from potential to promoted to board member and beyond. And you've really responded. You've not only hung in there for each other during this pandemic, and you really have. I mean, you have really stepped up to be there for each other in ways we have not seen before. I've been really profoundly touched by that. But you are asking for help a lot more. It's like one of the silver linings of the pandemic is making clear to all of us, including me, that we need help and support, and we need more of it. As we've journeyed through this together, I've really begun to reconceptualize what we're doing and sort of taking inspiration from the software world, if you will. I'm thinking of our community, our CG community, as a community as a service or a CAS. And just as sports stars and Hollywood celebrities have agents, this CAS is your agent, if you will, helping you each step of the way. And I think, our philosophy is what I'm calling CAMP. C for coach, A for agent, M for mentor, P for peer. In other words, we are a campy CAS. And being playful, I think, is key to being vulnerable. And being vulnerable and opening our hearts is what we'll talk about today with our second fall keynote, which is with Barbara Becker, who's the author of the beautiful and powerful Heartwood. And one last thing before I say more about Barbara and we get going, I want to dedicate these fall meetings to our friend Sam Taylor. Sam Taylor, some of you know Sam. Sam was a close friend of mine and a leader in the councils for a long time. And he died 4 years ago, coming up on 4 years ago, from brain cancer. And he is definitely part of our Heartwood, Sam Taylor. And by the way, one of the things about Sam Taylor is that he loved to wear crazy shirts like what I'm wearing now. So this is in dedication to you, Sam. I love you. I miss you. You're here. And when I woke up this morning, I felt your presence. I felt your presence. Well, there we go. Barbara helps us think about how to deal with loss, anything unexpected. In the last few years, some of us have lost jobs, have gone through divorce, have lost parents, or had parents who are grieving or dealing with Alzheimer's, dementia, et cetera. Colleagues, spouses, and in some cases, we have members who have lost children. And grief is a human experience, but we have few spaces that allow us to experience grief like I am right now, or loss of any kind. And small or large, there's one of the things that Barbara teaches is there's no hierarchy of loss or grief. And for busy leaders, we want to suppress the sadness and kind of move on. And that's not Barbara Becker's approach. Not that she doesn't know busy, by the way. Let me tell you, she's a lecturer at Columbia University, a human rights advocate, an author, of course, a multi-faith minister and disaster chaplain. That's profound, here in the city of New York. A mother of 2 adolescent boys, wonderful kids, and a spouse to an entrepreneur, actually, Dave Belatsky, the founder and CEO of Uncommon Goods, and a longtime council member and friend. Dave knew Sam, by the way, and I want to thank you, Dave, for bringing us Barbara. And Barbara, I'm so glad you married Dave so we could meet you. Let's talk about your new book, Heartwood, The Art of Living with the End in Mind. And actually, I want to start with that, the title, Heartwood. That's such an important metaphor. Tell us about that.
Thank you, Phil. And let me just say how much I admire what you and all of the council members are doing with collaborative gain. As I've come to learn more and more about it, I've thought of my own mentors in my work. One of them is Gloria Steinem. And it's been such a privilege to work with her. And she said something that I think is really relevant to us today, which is that telling our own stories is both the hardest thing and the most important thing that we have to contribute. So, Heartwood, yeah. My story with this book really began with the loss of both of my parents. My parents died within a couple of months of each other, and I was bereft. And knowing how important language is, I started looking around for a metaphor or a symbol to help me get through. And I thought back to the time that my husband, Dave, who you mentioned, and I took our children to California to see the redwood old growth forest. And if you go to the visitor center there, you'll notice a cross section of the tree. And they put pins in the growth rings to give you the history of the tree. So you might have Vikings come to North America, the rise of Genghis Khan, the Declaration of Independence is signed. And you'll also notice in that cross section of the tree that the center part of the tree is darker, and that's known as the heartwood. It's the part most prized by woodworkers for its durability and strength. But what most people don't realize is that the heartwood is dead. It's completely inert. I know it's no longer participating in the flow of water and nutrients up and down the tree, but for the growth rings of a tree to grow, it needs the support of that which came before. And that is our heartwood. It turns out us people are a lot like the trees. No, the essence of the people we have loved and lost form our heartwood, as do the lessons that we've learned from the other situations that you brought up, separations, divorce, illness, loss of home and community. So Heartwood lets us tell the story of both love and loss at the same time.
Yeah, I love it. It's meant so much to me. And I just want to say, I just found out that one of Sam has 3 daughters. One of his beautiful daughters, Ashton Taylor, is with us today. I don't know if anyone else from Sam's family is, but it means so much, Ash, that you're here, and thank you for being here. You are now also such an important part of my life. After Sam's death, I got to know his family, and they have been a beautiful and important part of my life. So let's continue with this, and the metaphor and the stories you tell in the book. By the way, we sent all of you the book. If you don't have it, if you haven't read it yet, you are in for an amazing treat. This is a book that is written with grace. I mean, it is the experience of reading it fills you with beauty, with a sense of love and connection. And it's just also well written. Barbara, wow, this is a good book. And you know, I love language, and we've talked about that. And she's taught me a lot about how to write by just simply reading her book. Tell us about the subtitle, The Art of Living with the End in Mind. What?
Right. Um, One of the very first stories I tell in the book is about my childhood friend, Marissa, who was diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer at the age of 30. And in my profound anticipatory grief of the loss I knew I would have, I got extremely anxious, and I did what I always do. I turned to books to try to help me figure out and make some kind of meaning out of this. I mean, I observed Marissa doing beautifully in her time. I mean, she took a trip to Italy, which was her family's ancestral home. She spent quality time with family and friends, and it was admirable. So what I learned was in all this reading was that sort of the sages throughout the ages have advised us that if we want to truly live, we should think about our mortality. And you'll find this in the poet Rumi. The Dalai Lama talks about this. The Stoic philosophers like Seneca and Marcus Aurelius, they all advise us to live with the end in mind if we want to truly embrace living. But what a paradigm shift this would be in our death-shy world. And we do everything to push death and loss under the rug. You know, fortunately, there's a lot of research that's catching up with this idea from the wisdom traditions, which is that there's such a thing called post-traumatic growth. And we find it more often than we find PTSD after really challenging life situations. And some of the positive psychological changes we'll find over time by acknowledging loss and hardship are like a deeper connection with others, a greater appreciation for life, new possibilities and purpose in life, creative growth, and like an awareness of our own personal strengths. We become better problem solvers. But all of this points to vulnerability. Like we have to have spaces to be vulnerable in order for this growth to happen. Otherwise, it will get bottled up and stuck. And this is why it's so important for leaders like everyone on this call to know that empathy is not a soft skill. And people will turn to you at work to celebrate birthdays and baby showers, but they also turn to you to be present for the losses as well.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Empathy is not a soft skill. Oh yeah. It's hard. And you know, a member recently was diagnosed with colon cancer, and they did not know what stage it was, and so forth. And there was a chance it was terminal. And they called me, and first I was just deeply honored that they called. And I want members to know that that's something you can do with me. And some of the members that we'll have on the call joining us today will talk about that. But to be present, you know, I tell people, like, you know, there's a, and maybe we can talk about this now, Barbara, there's not a lot of space for sadness, right? And you know, I was a positive baby, and people can tell I'm a relatively happy person. You know, I tend to be happy. That's, you know, I tend to be joyful, you know, but I've also learned, and I had a therapist who worked with me for years to like try to, that sadness is not a bad thing, you know. And when this person called me, you know, I just was able to be there with them. And, you know, often we'll say something like, oh, you'll fight it, you'll beat it, things like that. And I often find that doesn't actually help. This person was really fearing that they would be, you know, terminal. And I said, you know, and they thought they wouldn't be able to handle it, and they have children and so on. I said, let's just be there for a moment. You could handle that if that happens, and let's hope it doesn't, but you could. And it just created a space where they could cry and feel heard. And, you know, and I said, listen, if that happens, we'll work together, and you keep asking for help, and we'll figure out how to do that together. And I've learned, you know, I've learned that. I didn't always know how to do that, right? And it's your book and work of others. But I wonder if you could say a little bit more. Like, I know in your book, one of the things you say some simple things about what people can do or what you've learned to do. You listen a little bit more. You say, I love you a little bit more. You know, well, talk about that, and talk about what you've learned about being with people who are dying, because you've learned a lot about that.
Yeah. So I would say that sadness and many other emotions that are often categorized as negative, like feeling confused and fearful and weary, are a normal part of the grief process. A lot of people don't know that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief were actually intended for people who received a diagnosis, as opposed to those of us going through a loss. On 9/11, my office was just a few blocks from the World Trade Towers. I was so close, and I was with my son, who was just 1.5 years old. And grief counselors were called into our office, and they advised us to deal with those emotions right then, because they said if we don't, they have a way of popping up and coming to get us in the future, whether we like it or not, and probably when we least expect it. So I really took that in. I believe that so truly. I think that this emphasis we have in our culture on positivity has tipped into toxic positivity. You know, we're told to look for the silver lining, look on the bright side, you know, time heals all wounds. And when we rush to solutions like that, we are not acknowledging how fragile life can be. We also, as a person hearing that, can feel guilty, like we can feel like we brought a loss or illness on ourselves somehow with our negative attitude. And we also do things like we gaslight ourselves when we say, oh, but other people have it so much worse than I do. And we keep going to that as a response. So what do we do instead? I really think this is about embracing a life of psychological richness rather than just chasing happiness. And that's looking into the complexity of life and dealing with these messy emotions rather than trying to bypass them. And the other thing I would say is that the Taoists say this so beautifully. They say this is a world of 10,000 joys and 10,000 sorrows. And one of the most important things we can do is embrace the paradox rather than just go to one side of it, 10,000 joys.
Yeah. I mean, one of the paradoxes is, you know, in that conversation I was having, there was a real we built a real connection in a more profound way. And, you know, Sam's youngest daughter, when he died, was in 9th grade, and you know, it was such a tough time to lose your father. And, you know, she and I ended up talking a lot. She was a big support to me, actually, as I am going through a journey, which I've sort of talked about a little bit, but I guess I'm talking about it now. A kind of non-binary journey that I'm going through, and she was really there for me, and I was there for her. And then when another member of the councils, who I'm introducing in a moment, when his wife died and he had sons, she was happy to speak to them, you know, and I said to her, you know, the pain you're feeling now won't go away, but at some point it's going to also become a gift. It's going to become a gift that you can give to others, because, you know, you have walked this path. And it's, you know, and I know it meant so much. So I think it is 10,000 joys and 10,000 sorrows, and they come together. And how do we be more, I love that idea of how do we be more psychologically rich? I think that does ironically lead to happiness, but a different kind of happiness than sometimes I think the popular media associates with happiness. One that is the paradox. Well, Barbara, let's transition. Your book is full of stories of people who are in your Heartwood. And it's such a beautiful way to write this book, as you go through your journey. And I do want to include, let's just acknowledge that the day the book was released, you also got some news.
Yeah.
Isn't that right?
So the day that Heartwood was released, I was undergoing surgery for a new diagnosis of breast cancer. And I had dealt with my own vulnerability around loss in very closeted ways, I would say, in the past. One of the chapters is about 2 miscarriages that Dave and I had. And we lost 2 daughters around the time of our sons, who are born and alive and wreaking havoc out there in the world today. But during that time, there was no social media to speak of. We didn't know about celebrities like Meghan Markle telling us about her miscarriages. And without any role models or any real way to think about this, I dealt with that period of time by trying to compartmentalize my grief. I thought that while I was at work, I would be like happy and up for my team, and I wouldn't tell them anything. And when I went home, I would crash. And I guess I don't even need to say how that went. I mean, I felt really isolated. It was quite a dark and depressing time in my life. So being diagnosed with breast cancer and having this book come out at the same time, it felt like it would be profoundly disingenuous to not tell people, or just to tell them about only the joyful side of life. Yeah. So I've opened up, and I decided to talk about this journey. Yeah, I brought up my mentor, Gloria Steinem, who I met with during this time, and she's a 3-time breast cancer survivor. I didn't know that. So like that connection that you make with people who have been through not just the same illness as you, but through all kinds of hardships. I can't say enough about that. And I'll just share a little story about Dave and Dave's work. Dave decided to try to be vulnerable at work about this too. He was missing all kinds of meetings because of surgeries that I had, and radiation and oncology appointments. And one day he was at work and he encountered Steve, the elevator repair guy. And they had a very joking, superficial kind of banter relationship. And Steve said, "How you doing, Dave?" And Dave said, not so well. This just happened in my life. And as when you invite people into your Heartwood a little bit, Steve got quiet and nodded and put his hand on Dave's shoulder and said that he was going through the same thing with his life. So they never would have known that, if we don't create these little openings, these little portals into the deeper side of ourselves. And as the American spiritual teacher Ram Dass said, we're all just walking each other home.
I love that. Well, as you and Dave, I know there's more to say, and I know Dave shared with the whole company what he was going through, and I was really moved by that. And as you were so moved by the people in your life, and then you proposed that as part of the session today, we have several council members join us live. So we're going to do that. We have a mini panel, if you will, of members, and we're going to start with John Seebeck. So, John, thank you for joining. You and I have known each other for 15 years or more. You're a longtime e-commerce leader, also friend of Sam Taylor's, by the way. And for the last several years, you've run the big multi-billion-dollar e-commerce operation at CDW. But then 2 years ago now, you lost your wife to cancer, Elizabeth. You and she had been together for 30 years and had 4 sons. And you and I talked through that period at the end of her life, but for a good 14 months after her death, you couldn't talk to me or anyone else really about your grief, and then you were ready. So would you say a few words about your journey and tell us a little bit about you and Elizabeth?
Of course. Thank you, Phil. Thanks for always setting the example for all of us. Thank you, Barbara. I did want to say that I read Heartwood over Memorial Day weekend this year, and I've read my share of books on loss and grief. Heartwood moved me so much. I had to email David. I know David from the e-commerce world, and I said, David, can you send this email to your wife, Barbara? And he did. And Barbara and I spoke, and it just came at a crucial time for me. So I do want to say that you should read the book. It's a really worthwhile book. Next Monday is the 2-year anniversary of Elizabeth's death. She died from the continuing spread of ovarian cancer, a disease she was diagnosed with 33 months before she died. You can Google Elizabeth Seebeck obituary if you want to understand Elizabeth and her legacy. The most representative was the 4 sons that Phil mentioned that she had to say goodbye to. Lyle, who was a month shy of his 25th birthday, Ray, who was 23 at the time, Johnny, who was a month shy of his 20th birthday, and then Henry, who was just a couple months into his 18th year. As Phil said, I worked for CDW. CDW supported me beyond words when Elizabeth was diagnosed, and they continue to support me to this day. We all talk about culture. Don't ever underestimate the power of it in an organization. The right culture will attract and retain the right people who will support the people in the hardest of times. And I believe the right culture will produce continued positive results. CDW is certainly evidence of this. I returned to work 17 days after Elizabeth died, and I've worked ever since. Over the next, it was really 17 months. Phil said 14, but over the next 17 months, I lived a pretty good life. I fell in love, deeply in love with, and I remain in that state with a woman Elizabeth knew, and I believe Elizabeth wanted me to be with. Elizabeth and I never discussed what I do next in that regard. And I regret this to some degree.
Yeah.
I certainly grieved in the 17-month period, but it was not until April of this year that I really faced the music. At a serious crisis point, I called Phil. Everything was hitting me. My grief, the grief of others, life purpose, and just general happiness.
Yeah.
With the help of a very good grief counselor. Sorry, Phil.
I was just so touched that you called.
I mean, Phil, I cannot tell you how crucial he was to my journey. And what a close friend I consider Phil, and how much he's helped me. One of the things Phil said is like you better do this grief counselor thing. And I did. And I found a good grief counselor, and I worked through 3 questions, which are essential in the process of grieving and mourning. First question is, what is your relationship with Elizabeth now that she is gone?
Yeah.
The second was, what is your relationship with yourself now that you're alone? And the third was, what is your relationship to the world now? Who are you? And everybody can answer those questions when you've lost someone extraordinarily close to you. Later in April, Phil set up a peer coaching call, captioned "Death of a Spouse." Sad, but real. JJ joined this, as did other council members, Mark Kaufman, Mary Baumgartner-Jones. Maybe we can just take a moment to acknowledge them, all 3, for being there that day and the love and support that they provided each other and certainly me.
Yeah. Thank you, John. I agree.
One of the things that many of us in this scenario wrestle with is our jobs. More specifically, the meaning they provide or do not provide. In June, I turned to JJ to talk more specifically about this topic. She was a godsend. And I
You're
think
gonna
she
be
might
here in a
talk.
moment, everyone, just so you know. Yes. Sorry, John, I just wanted to let.
Yeah, JJ's coming up, followed by JJ. Listening to her movement through her pain, through her loss, through her life was so good for me. She became a beacon for me. How she reached more states of peace as she pushed through things. I know it's Phil's mantra, but this asking for help thing really works. So thank you, JJ. And thanks to her, I was able to come up with a way to think through my work and career. She gave me the frameworks and the example. It was enormously helpful. I now know much more about what I want, what's important, and what the future holds for me. So to close, I continue to ask for help, and whenever I don't, or whenever I don't go to those most important to me for the help, is when I get the most lost and cause and experience the most pain. One thing I've learned is that quiet reflection and thinking is good, but it's only part of life. The only way to get the answers is to live, to do it, to share your raw fears, unprocessed thoughts, feelings as you go with those you care about, and get in there and try stuff. That's where the answers come, and that's where the meaning comes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Beautiful, John. Thank you so much for sharing what you've gone through. You're just such a wonderful human being.
Thank you,
Barbara, I
Phil.
know
Anybody can reach out to me at any time.
When I
Before we-
first,
AJ, Barbara, did you want to respond to what?
I
John
just
said?
wanted to quickly say that when I learned about John and your loss of Elizabeth, I took your advice and I went on Google and looked up her obituary. What a beautiful woman inside and out, and the 5 lucky guys that you all are to have had her in your life. And thank you too for pointing out that there is no set timeline for grief. You might return to work in 17 days. A couple of years later, you might find yourself in a rough spot. And all of these ideas that, oh, in a year it will be done are kind of ridiculous. So thank you for pointing that out.
Right.
Thank you, Barbara, for
John,
Elizabeth and saying the other. Thank you.
John, stay on a moment as JJ comes on, because I want the two of you to, I want JJ, I know you want to respond to John and then tell us your story.
I mean, I do. I just appreciate John's vulnerability, and, we don't know each other well, and I feel pretty close to him. And also I'm just honored. I guess I never knew until, just this week that, that helped. And, if my experience, if my grief if it can have purpose, and if it can help other people, I'm all for it. Put it to work. I'd like to put it to work. So thanks for letting me do that. You've been a help to me as well, John. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Let me introduce you, JJ. You first joined the councils in 2017 when you worked at Appfolio. And then several years ago, you were on vacation in Mexico with your longtime partner and best friend, Justin. And on your last day there, you went out for a body surf together, and Justin stopped while you were swimming back to shore and was pulled out unresponsive by lifeguards after what appeared to be a massive heart attack. A year later, you left your job to grieve and recover. Today, you're the head of product at a high growth startup and someone who helps others dealing with grief, as we have just witnessed with John. Talk to us for a moment about your journey and what you did to help John as well as yourself and others.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to say this is such a great topic. I appreciate all of this. Like, I think this is so important. So thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Phil. I love post-traumatic growth. I think if I were to sum up my story, that's where I've realized I've come to. I'm totally going to steal that, Barbara. It's really a great, all those things, deeper connection, empathy. So it's been 3.5 years since I lost Justin, which means I am only 3.5 years into defining what my life, what my identity is without him. As you can imagine, that day fundamentally changed me. Before we left for Mexico, Justin and I had put an offer in on our first house. And just an hour before we went into the water, we were talking about our future. And then in one instant, it's torn away. 6 days later, Justin came home in an overhead bin, and I had to kind of face the future that wasn't mine anymore. One thing that I knew and embraced from the beginning, for whatever reason, is that I knew that I had to be intentional with my grief. I had to give it space. I knew that the only way past it was through it. So I made that a priority. I made my grief a priority above all else. The only reason I was able to go back to work a month later is because I worked at Appfolio, and I could spend an hour here enumerating the many ways in which that company cared for me, held me up, contributed to all the things that come, with after losing someone and planning events. And it just was incredible. And many of those people are on this call right now. And I just want to take this opportunity to again, thank you.
Thank you, Appfolio, for doing.
Thank you, Appfolio.
AJ.
Yeah. I second John's comment about culture. We think about culture in the sense of like, how are we going to show up for work and how are we going to get good work in? And I think the pandemic also has helped us realize that culture isn't just about work. It's about how we show up for each other as humans. And Appfolio definitely knows that. Something I learned really early on, and my intention to kind of move through this, is I needed to process my grief externally. So not only did I seek out, support groups, all the various flavors of counseling and therapy, but I talked about Justin and my grief everywhere. One of the most controversial things I did during this time was turn to social media to share my experience. And it's not because I needed attention. I needed to give voice to my grief. I could care less who was listening. So I'm sure that I lost my fair share of like passive friends and followers, because it made everyone uncomfortable, because, you're not supposed to be sad in public. You're only supposed to share your best life on social media. But I didn't really care. And actually, I was surprised by the overwhelming response I received of people thanking me for being vulnerable. So grieving people I didn't know all that well or at all would connect with me because I was articulating out loud what they feared they were experiencing only in isolation. And so by giving voice to that, I learned that expressing my pain out loud has the ability to provide comfort to even a stranger. So that's the reason I was super happy to jump on the opportunity to join John's peer coaching call. And I'm continuously grateful to Phil for setting up space like this in our councils and, encouraging us to be humans together. John shared, as he mentioned, that he was struggling to determine his role and whether CDW was a good fit, which deeply resonated me. No matter how amazing Appfolio was, I had this urge and this itch that it was time to maybe move on. And that was just a few months after Justin died. And you have to understand that when you're this deep in grief, you don't trust yourself. You don't trust any of your thoughts. You don't trust any of your instincts. Am I feeling this because it's genuine truth? Or is my grief clouding my judgment and trying to find a way to jump ship, right, and change everything? So I wrestled with exactly what John was wrestling with for way too many months at Appfolio. There's people on the call they were shaking their head right now. And I was depressed and I was really frozen for a lot of that time. And so on that call, and then in that subsequent one-on-one conversation that John and I had, I was able to be really real with him about that experience. And we talked through the similarities and our differences in our situations. And I guess I would hope that my hindsight helped John not to doubt himself and his grief the way I did, and especially not to wait as long as I did to make his decision. The decision I made ultimately was to move on, which was different from John's. But the day I finally just made the decision, didn't even matter the decision. The day I made the decision, it was a year after Justin died. And it was the day the clouds just lifted slightly for the first time. And it was the first day in a year that I claimed control back over my life. It wasn't just life happening at me. I actually still had control, and hope started to creep in. And that the world was bigger than this bubble and the grief that I'd been living in.
What I love about that moment, JJ, is that you gave yourself the gift of taking some time off and just going through a journey with your grief and what you wanted to create in your life. And now you're in this great job at a startup, but you gave yourself permission to go through an uncharted water, really. And I was really touched by that. Barbara, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, thank you so much for your bravery in telling your story, JJ. I think it's touching all of us deeply. And the way that you mourn sounds like it's exactly true to who you are as a person, and I honor that. There's actually a whole movement afoot to demystify death and loss. Some people call it death positivity. There are death cafes and death over dinners happening all around the world. And it's part of this acknowledgement of really doing the hardest work you'll ever have to do.
Thank you. Yeah.
A good friend of mine who's 92 years old and is unbelievably vibrant, she held a funeral. That was her word.
Oh, I love that.
And she brought all her friends over to have a big party for her funeral. Because the New York Times covered it, and it's kind of part of this movement that Barbara is talking about.
That's so, I love that. That's so great.
JJ, really, thank you for being so giving. And there's so many things in chat, and people keep the chat going. It's lovely to see those comments. It really means a lot to JJ and John and us to see your responses. Okay, let's bring on one more member. And JJ, why don't you just stay on for a moment as we bring on Lauren. Lauren, I know you might want to say a few words first about what JJ and John just said, and then I can introduce you.
Yeah, I think that it just really shows that everybody has to go on this journey in their own way, but the power of being honest about it and reaching out to others truly is cathartic. And I think, once we start talking, I think that's a big part of what the roundtables can actually do for us.
Yeah, thank you. All right, let me introduce you now, Lauren. So you're a new member of this community. Thank you for joining us. This is your first year. Welcome. I hope we've made you feel welcome. That's one of our biggest focuses these days, is to really create as welcoming a community as we can. You and I started to get to know each other, and you've joined one of our aging parents roundtables. So after you had a great career in Chicago, your mother in Maryland died last November. And that's, boy, we could spend the entire day talking about that, right? Like what it means when our mothers die. And leaving your father in the care of your brother and his family. And you decided to both keep your job and work remotely and move back to Maryland to help with your father and lessen the burden on your brother. And you ended up joining one of our first aging parents roundtables, and where you shared that despite the move you made to be physically there and to be present, you often have felt like no matter how much you do, it's never enough, and that you have a nagging sense of guilt. And this is so common. Many of our members experience versions of that. And I'd love to have you just talk about your journey and what it's been like to work with other council members on your Aging Parents Roundtable who are also going through similar kind of guilt-ridden grieving journeys.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. I just made reference to the roundtables, and I would say that one of the biggest values for me is that the roundtable reminded me that oftentimes our brain will play a trick on us. It'll make us think that what we're thinking or what we're feeling, that we are the only ones that are experiencing that, and that whatever heaviness we feel from it, it is our burden to bear alone, either because we don't want to admit our inability to cope, or because we don't want to be a burden to others. So let me take a step back and tell you a little bit about my situation. So as Phil mentioned, my parents were actually living in Maryland with my brother and his family. And in November of 2020, my mother passed away. Now, she had been sick, but nothing that would suggest that it was terminal. And even when the palliative doctor told my brother and I that they were going to place her into hospice, both of us were in this extreme state of denial. She'd been sick before, and we were confident that she would recover.
Yeah.
The next day, James called to tell me that this time it was different, and that if I wanted to see her, I needed to come right now. And so I was there the next day, and I stayed for over 2 weeks, and she passed away 5 days after I went back to Chicago. Mm-hmm. Now, being in Maryland showed me the cost of caring for the elderly, the cost in terms of the physical as well as the emotional. And I knew that there was no way that I was going to have my brother go through this again with my father. And so I made the decision to relocate. It gives a little bit of relief to my brother. He and his family are able to tap out. So they were able to go on a 2-week vacation this summer and not worry about, is daddy going to be okay? And it also means that he's not daddy's sole source of entertainment. And he has a partner in crime when it comes to getting my father back and forth to medical appointments or even making some decisions. Now, being with my father, it's hard but I've heard other people reference this gift that you get from doing certain things, but it is also a gift. You know, it has taught me to be a better listener without imposing my views on other people. So when my father talks about the fact that he's dying, I now don't feel the need to tell him he's not. But what I do is I remind him that, yes, you are, and we're going to live to the fullest until you go.
Yeah.
And when he needs to talk about the loneliness that he feels because of his wife of 60 years is no longer with him, I lean into the conversation because I know no matter how hard it is for me to hear it, it is harder for him to feel it. It also means that I've mastered the fine art of going to a doctor's appointment with an adult and not taking over, but asking the right questions, because I still want my daddy to feel like my father and not my child. Now, the good news is when we go out, I have also mastered the art of picking up a 90-pound scooter with ease while wearing a sundress, because I don't want him to feel like he can't help me. And my favorite is that when we part ways at the end of an excursion, I've taught him how to do the goodbye. So when I say, thanks for rolling with a sister, he knows to say, and thanks for letting a brother roll.
Oh.
And so this brings us back to the round table.
Yeah.
And the guilt that a lot of us were expressing. I realized that while our stories were different, they were really the same. And that each one of us needed to learn how to give ourselves or grant ourselves just a little bit of grace, knowing that we were doing the best we could. And at the end of the day, that is all anybody can ask.
Oh, Lauren. Wow. Wow. I love that you don't try to correct him when he says, I'm dying, but you be there with him. And then you say, but we're going to live until that happens. It's accepting. It's radical acceptance, and it's connecting, right? It allows you to be more with him.
Yeah. And it wasn't my first reaction. You know, in the beginning, I would be like, Daddy, don't say that. You're fine. Or when he would say he's lonely, and I'm like, but you have us. And I realized that's not what he needed. He needed to be heard. And I needed to be a better listener. And I can't say that because of my experience, I have to be there with him and his. And it just got so much easier when that light bulb clicked for me.
Wow.
Thank you
Barbara.
for reminding us that even the most resilient and strong of people can be pushed to their limit with caregiving. And just before we all got on this call, I learned that Lauren is going on vacation soon. So that, I mean, it seems like a small thing, but this self-care is one of the most important things that we can do as we're in those caregiver roles. So I applaud you for that.
Yeah. And I think there's a really and a direct connection between the notion of self-care and what I'm hearing, I think, Lauren, from you and John and JJ, of course, throughout your book, Barbara, is that the degree to which we can touch and give expression to the pain we feel. And there were some questions in the chat. Yes, not just about death, but someone said a childhood with alcoholic parents. Absolutely, to find a way to share, to grieve that, to come to terms with the impact that had on you. I had that. I know what that's like. Had a huge impact. And that's what we want to move into now. And so, Barbara, I wish we had the whole afternoon with you. I really do. But I'm gonna go ahead and share the screen and talk for just a moment about the exercise that Summer and you designed for everyone to do in their own council meetings next. All right, so let me share my screen. And by the way, as I do that, let's give Summer a round of applause for her visual note-taking. We're going to share what she did here with all of you. Barbara, would you like to just say a few words about this exercise?
Sure. The exercise is pretty self-explanatory. I love how big this is. So you have space to put in who is in your Heartwood. Just a couple of really quick points. When Phil and I talked about this, we decided that we wanted to say that nothing you can say can freak us out in terms of your loss. And don't assume that your loss is smaller than anyone else's and therefore shouldn't be listed in the Heartwood. There really is no hierarchy of loss. If you want to talk about your pet who saw you through so many things in life, please go right ahead.
Yeah. So with that, keep Barbara's words in mind. What we're going to do, just to let you know what's going to happen next, is we're going to end this session, and then you're going to join your private counsel session, which is a different Zoom link, of course. And you and your counsel and moderator are going to go through this exercise. And again, no hierarchy of loss here. This can be, job loss. It can be friendship loss. It can be the fact that we're not meeting in person, that there's a loss to that, right? Again, no hierarchy and no pressure. If you don't feel like you can share a particular loss, then don't feel like you have to do that. One step at a time, do what you feel comfortable doing. Big round of applause to Barbara Becker. Barbara, your book is such a wonderful gift. John and Lauren talked about it. I read it and reread it. I so much want everyone. You have the book. We sent it to you. You also have the exercise sheet. Get that out. But read that book. Read that book. It will fill you with grace and love. So, Barbara, thank you so much, and everyone else, thank you.
Thank you all, and thank you in advance for what you're about to do in the sessions together.
All right, so somebody raised their hand here. I guess we should formally end this so everyone can go to their council meetings. Many people have probably left already. I'll stop sharing, but I just I don't want to say goodbye.
Can we capture the chat so we can read these?
Yes, we're going to do that. We will save the chat. Several of us will save it to make sure it gets saved, but yeah. And thank you, everyone. Lauren and JJ and John, wow, you guys were amazing. Wow. We could just, JJ, I don't know if you want to, I know you have to jump, but I just wanted to thank you again. And I don't know if you wanted to.
Thank you. I think, thank you, everybody. I don't know. This is just so great. It's really hard. I'm having mixed feelings about it, but I know, and during my year off, I reflected a lot about the kind of person I wanted to be and what purpose I wanted in life. And one of the things, my mantra was I want to encourage humans to be human, and I want to bring that to the business place. And here you are, Barbara, and here you are, Phil, actually living kind of my dream. And thank you for letting me participate in that, because it's something that I knew I wanted to do. And John and Lauren, your vulnerability is appreciated, and I just care so much about everyone here. Thank you.
It's helpful to do this with other people, right? So it's mutually reinforcing. We're not the only person being vulnerable. We're being vulnerable and helping each other be vulnerable. All right, I think I should go ahead and close this, so I kick out the rest of the members. So they go to
Brittany, if you're there, thank you so much for all of your help in getting.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Brittany. Thanks, everybody. Phil.
Okay.
See you later.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.